Okay, so today's daf yomi is Kiddushin daf Chaf Hey, and we're going to start on the bottom of Chaf Daled Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. So we're discussing about how a Canaanite slave goes free if his eye is knocked out. So the Gemara asked the question, Amar of Sheishis, Haresha Haisa Eno Samuya. Let's say his eye was unable to see, and the master knocked it out. Even though the eye was unable to see, the slave goes free, even though he knocked out an eye that was not functioning. My time, because the he even though he knocked out a limb that wasn't able to see, he's now what's called mechusar aver. He's missing a limb, and so since he's missing a limb, he still goes free. And Vitani Tuna, we have a brisa that teaches this idea because it says Tamos v'zichros b'behema. Let's say you have an animal, a oa, carbon oa that you're bringing, then an animal is required to be tamim. It needs to be without a blemish, and zichros, the oa, needs to be a male. But this is a qualification for a male animal, but not a female. Ve'ein Tamos v'zichros ba'ofos, not by a bird. You don't need to have a bird that has no blemish and also that it's male in order for it to be an ola. Yachol yavsha gapa nikta ragla nechtata ina. I might think also if its wing dried up or if its leg was cut off or if its eye was severed, I might think also that it's capable of becoming an ola offering. Tamor mina ofukov. Only some of the requirements of the it has to be tamim, but it doesn't have to be tamim, but it still has to have these requirements. And we see from here that if it's nichtata, that if the bird has its eye knocked off, even though it was blind initially, that's not considered a blemish. But once its eye is cut out, that's going to be considered a blemish. And so therefore, so too by the Evet Kanani, even though he couldn't see, now that his eye is cut off, that's considered a blemish, and he goes free. It's going to be considered mechusar aver. Amar Barashi Amarav. Let's say he had Yeseres, he had an additional finger. So we said if the master knocks out the Canaanite slave's finger, he goes free. But let's say he has the Yeseres, he has an extra finger, and he cuts it off. Then under those circumstances, the slave goes free. Even if he had 6 fingers. So he still has 5 fingers. So he's technically speaking complete, but he still goes free. Amaravuna Vahushan Esperas Agav Hayad. This is if it was a type of finger that was counted on the hand with the other fingers. That's when it goes free. Gemara tells us that the Zabad and Nizunya will also appear Keda. Elders of Nizunya, they didn't come to the drasha of Rav Chisda. I don't know. Can you imagine having an opportunity to go to Rav Chisda's drasha and not going? Can you even imagine such a thing? But these elders of Nizunya, they didn't go to the drasha of Rav Chisda. So Amrei Rav Hamnuna. Rav Hamnuna said to them, Zio san inhu. He said to them, go. He said, Rav Chisda said to Rav Hamnuna, go and excommunicate them. My time will also Rabban Lapirka. So Rav Hamnuna goes to the elders of Nizunya. He says, why don't you come to the drasha of Rav Chisda? They said, why should we come? The Ba'inam named Milsa, we asked him a question, he didn't answer us. Amarus of Rav Hamnuna, was the Talmud of Rav Chisda, said, did you ever ask me a question and I didn't answer it? So they asked him the following question. So this is the question that the elders of Nizunya asked Rav Hamnuna. If there was a slave and the master, he made a meaning to say he cut off some of the testicles. So what's the question is, since the testicles are contained within a sac, so therefore, are they still going to be considered like a blemish on an external part of his body? And therefore, he goes free. Or maybe since they're inside the sac, they're not going to be considered external, and then maybe the Canaanite slave doesn't go free. So lo ave biyade. So Rav Nuna didn't have the answer. Amru lo ma'ashmech. They said to him, "What's your name?" Amru lo Amnuna. He said to them, "My name is Amnuna." Amru lo Lav Amnuna. Your name's not Amnuna, or Karnuna. It's like Karnuna. It was a derogatory name. Maybe it was a reference to the fact that Rashi says, Yoshev Kronos Ata, you sit in the corners. Well, Baal Torah, you don't know Torah. They insulted him. Asla Kami to Rav Chisda, so Rav Hamnuna went back to Rav Chisda. He said, Amrei Masnisa Bauminech. They were asking you a Mishnah. It was an open Mishnah. You should have known it, basically. The Tanan Esrim V'Arba Rosh Evarim Sheba Adam, in order to the Mishnah in the Gayim, it talks about Saras. There are 24 limbs in a person, kulam emetamin mishum milchya, and there are the 24 limbs that a Canaanite slave goes free. None of those parts of the body that if you cut them off, the Canaanite slave goes free. None of them will make you tarmite because of tsaras. In order for it to be tsaras, you have to be able to see the whole thing at once. And these parts of the body all have a downward slope to them, so you don't see them all at once. So you don't become tummy from them on account of tsaras. And what are the 24 fingers? Elohim, the 24 parts of the body that if the Canaanite slave gets knocked off, he automatically goes free. What are these parts? They're the following. Rashi Etzbos, the tips of the fingers of the Yadayim, Viraglayim, the toes. Rashi Eznaim, the tips of the ears. Virosh Achotem, the tip of the nose. Rosh Hagviyah, the tip of the male member. Virosh Dadim Shabeisha, and the tips of the woman's breasts, whereas Rabbi Huda says Av Shabe'ish, also the tips of a male breast. So Vitani Alam Bekul and Eva Yehotze Behem Ucheres. In all of them, the slave goes free. These parts, these 24 parts of the body, which Saras don't apply to because they're on a downward slope, so you can't see it all at once. The slave goes free in all of them. Rebbe says Afa Sirus. Rebbe says the slave also goes free with Sirus. Now we'll have to see what Sirus is, because it can't be a reference to the castration of the male member, because that's the Gviyah. So it's a reference to the Beitzim. That's what the Gemara is going to say. So Rebbe says also the Sirus, and Ben Azai says Afa Washem. Ben Azai says you also go free if you sever the tongue. So Amar Mar, when he says Afa Sirus, he's talking not Rashi. He says he's not talking about the Tzaras, he's talking about the slave. So that's what he's saying, that this is a part where you go free for a slave, and Ben Azai adds also the tongue. So now let's analyze this statement. Damar Ma Rabbi Omer Afa Sirus Tamai. What is he castrating? Ilema Sirus to get. If we want to say that Rabbi's talking about the Sirus of the member, well, Hainu Gvia, that's the tip of the member. So clearly it's not a reference to that, because if it was a reference to that, then it already said the Gvia. So it must be Elav Sirus to Beitzim. It must be that this is the Sirus of the testicles. And so therefore we're seeing from here that he's saying that if you're Mesaris to Beitzim, Rebbe says that the slave goes free. So that's the answer to the question. So Gemara says, well, Rebbe Omer Afa Sirus. Rebbe says also the testicles. The Rebbe Lashon Lo. Does Rebbe not say you go free if you sever the tongue? Veraminu, but don't we learn in the Brisa? Or Misha Haya Maze Vinitza Azal Piv. So you're sprinkling the ashes of the red heifer, and in order for a person to become purified, the ashes of the red heifer need to be sprinkled on a part of the body that is goy, Rashi says, that's revealed. So what happened here was you sprinkled the ashes, and the sprinkling came onto his mouth. So Rebbe says it's a valid sprinkling, and he's purified. Rebbe says considered purified. The Chum say it's not valid. And my love, so what are we referring to? Aren't we referring to the Lashono, the tongue? And so therefore Rebbe's saying that you're purified if it spills on your tongue. And we're seeing from here that Rebbe says that the tongue is external part of the body, so the slave should go free if that part is cut off. So it's a question, why does Rebbe not say on the tongue? So the Gemara says, no, it doesn't mean the tongue. No, al safasav, it refers to the lips. The Gemara says al safasav, pshita, on the lips, it's obvious that's a revealed part of the body. And the Gemara says, "Maldatema." You might have thought Zimnin dechalam sifsei. Sometimes he closes his lips so powerfully, so forcefully, like this, so that they're stuck together, and so therefore we're not going to consider it like a revealed part of the body. Kamash Milan, we don't say that. The Gemara says, "V'atanya." It can't be. We have another brayso which says Ali Shono. We have another brayso which says explicitly that if you sprinkle it on your tongue, it's going to be considered like it's a blemish, like it's a proper sprinkling, and it's purified. And furthermore, V'otanya v'shanita rova lashon. And we have another brayso that says that all of the blemishes that are considered to be a mum kavua on the animal, that would allow the firstborn animal to be slaughtered and eaten even outside the Beis Hamikdash. We say that if the majority of the tongue was removed, and Rebbe says Rov HaMedaber Shabbal Lashon. Rebbe says that it's just the place where the tongue makes the noise, the tip of the tongue. And anyway, we see from here that Rebbe clearly thinks that this is a revealed part of the body. So the Gemara says, okay, Rebbe Omer Sirus Velomi Ba'ilashon. Rebbe says the castration of the beitzim and also the tongue. And Ben Azai Omer Lashon of a Sirus Slow. Ben Azai says only the tongue, but not the beitzim. So the Gemara says, "My af." So why does Ben Azai say af halashon? Also the lashon. It includes what's going on before it. Gemara says akamaisa. He's referring to the earlier case. What's the earlier case? The earlier case is meaning to the 24 limbs and also the tongue. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, if Ben Azai is just referring to the tongue, and Rebbe is referring to the tongue and the beitzim, niktama de Ben Azai bereisha. So Niktama de Ben Azai, we should first put Ben Azai before Rebbe. So the Gemara says, Bereisha Tana Shama with the Rebbe. Bereisha Tana Shama with the Rebbe. That first, the Tana of the Brisa heard Rebbe's teaching, Vikava, and he established it as the serious of the Beitzim and also the Lashon. Vishama with Ben Azai, and then he heard Ben Azai's teaching, Vitani, and he taught it. Umishna Uzazamim Koma, and the initial teaching, we don't change it. Once you have a teaching, we don't remove it. It's too hard to get rid of the order because that's how we remember it. And so therefore, that's how it was taught. Rashi says, "Shamei achash nikva shal Rebbe etzel tanakama v'shikura b'fia talmidim kach lo zazo shal Rebbe mimkoma v'sidro shal Ben Azai acharel v'fisha girsa shkura b'feh kashal ashanosa v'lachzor v'lgorsa b'lashon acher." Once you memorize something, it's hard to forget it, get it out of your body, and go learn it another way. So the teretz is the first time you learn it, try to learn it right, because it's very hard to unlearn something and then learn it again the proper way. Easier said than done. Amar Ula Hakol Modim Bilashon Inyan Tuma. So we've been discussing whether or not the tongue is considered to be a revealed part of the body, in which case the slave would go free. And also in case it would be efficacious for the sprinkling of the ashes of the red heifer. So Ula teaches us another law of the tongue, that everybody admits that with respect to Tumah, B'lashon Inyan Tumah, if you have a sheretz falling on you, one of the 8 creepy crawly creatures, if it falls on you, it makes you tameh. So, but it's only if it falls on a revealed part of your body. So everybody admits that with respect to Tumah, the goa who eats all sheretz, it's considered a revealed part of the body vis-a-vis the sheretz. My taima. What's the reasoning? Because the pasuk says, "Asher yigal bo amarachmana b'hai nami bar negiyahu." The pasuk says that the tongue is going to be considered a place where it's capable of being a bar yigiyah, of touching. Because the pasuk says, "Hi," Rashi says, "The biyadav will shut off b'mayimhu." It says with respect to the zav, "V'kol asher yigabo azav." So we see it says the other will shut up that his hands had not yet washed in the water. So the Rashi says So because the tongue is like the hands, that it comes out and it touches things. So therefore, if a sheretz touches the tongue, then he'll become tamei. So But however, the Inyan Tvila with respect to immersing in the mikvah. Now, when you immerse in the mikvah, the water needs to touch all the external parts of your body, but not the internal parts of the body. So Inyan Tvila ketamon dami. With respect to tefillah, we view the tongue as a hidden part of the body that the body doesn't need, the water doesn't need to touch. Why not? My time of varachat basaro b'mayim, and it says he washes himself in the water. Just like his water is external, just like the water is outside his body. Afkol, just like his flesh is outside his body. Afkol me'avrai. So to anything that's external. When are they arguing only the inyan hazah, only with respect to sprinkling the water onto the tongue? Is that going to be effective? Rabbi Medami Tuma. Rabbi compares it to the tuma of the sheretz, and we say it's external. Rabbanan Medami Tefillah. The Rabbanan compare it to immersing in the mikvah, just like the tongue. You don't need to immerse it in the mikvah. Water doesn't need to touch it. So too, we're going to say that the sprinkling of the ashes on it is not effective. Excuse me. Both of them are arguing about the same pasuk, because the pasuk says v'hiza atar al tamei, that you sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer on the tamei, and then it states bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi, on day 3 and day 7 v'chito bayom hashvi, and then you purify on day 7 v'chibeis begadav v'rachat b'mayim v'taher ba'erev, and then you go into the mikvah. So Rabbi Savar v'hiza atar al tamei, you sprinkle it on tamei bayom hashlishi bayom hashvi v'chito, and then you're purified. And so therefore we're seeing from here that it's just like the question, we need the purification to fall up. Rashi says, but that we need the purification to fall upon someplace that's capable of washing, dahainu tefillah. And so therefore that's the position of the Rabbanan. But Rabbi says, Darash ala tamei, he expounds upon the fact that it says tamei v'chito, chitoy al makom tuma havechitoy, that if you did the purification on the place which became tamei, it's purification. So therefore we connect the purification to the place where you are tamei, and therefore the tongue is going to be effective for the purification. But Rabbanan sabri v'chito b'yom hashvi v'chibeis begadav v'rachatz b'mayim. The Rabbanan actually connected to, and needs to go on a place which is which is necessary for immersion, and that's not the tongue, because the tongue is inside your body. So the Gemara asked the question, Rabbanan nami nidam tuma. Why don't the Rabbanan compare it to tuma and say that just like tuma can be, it's just like it's tummy if it falls on the tongue, so too you could sprinkling it. Gemara says the Rabbanan don't want to do that. Tahara mitahara if the Rabbanan want to compare with tahara, and just so too, like immersion in the mitzvah, it's not required on the tongue, so too you can sprinkle it on the tongue for the ashes of the red heifer. The Rabbi Nadama Yoletvila. Why doesn't Rabbi compare it to immersing in the mikvah? It says v'chipes begadav hifsikayin. The words of chipes begadav are a new topic, and therefore it's not connected to the mikvah. We connect it to the way in which it becomes tummy from the sheretz. V'sava Rabbi le'inyan tefillah ketaman dami. Gemara says, does Rabbi really say that the tongue, with respect to tefillah, is going to be considered like a hidden part of the body that doesn't require water to go on it? There wasn't there once an incident with a maid in the house of Rabbi. She went into the mikvah. But when she came out of the mikvah, she found a bone between her teeth. Rabbi said you have to go back in. We see from here that even though the teeth are inside the mouth, Rabbi required the water on it. The Gemara says, no, that's not the ruling. We don't. Rabbi said we don't need that water to actually go on the inner parts of the mouth, but we do need the inner parts of the mouth to not have a chatzitza, an interposition, so that the water would be capable of going on it. And so therefore, even though the water doesn't need to go into the teeth, there can't be a bone in between the teeth which would have stopped the water going on it. This is like the teaching of Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera that this is a law with respect to the carbon mincha, that the carbon mincha needs to have the oil mixed with the flour, and if you have 61 isaron of flour, it's too much and the oil won't be mixed properly. But even though you don't have to actually mix the flour with the oil, it needs to be capable of being mixed. And so therefore, even though if you didn't mix the oil, it's still a kosher mincha offering, but it has to be capable. And so therefore, that's the same law here. Even though you don't have to actually do it, it needs to be capable of doing it. Now the Gemara says on the top of Chafei Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Kitanai, that this discussion, that this question that was asked to Rav Hamnuna, whether or not the cirrus of the beitzim allows the slave to go free, the castration of the beitzim, whether it goes free, this is actually a machokes tanayim. So because we say umalch v'kasos v'natok v'karos, that we say with respect to the blemishes of a firstborn animal that will allow it to be to be brought as to be eaten and not be brought as a carbon. That's if these have these parts of the testicles that they were crushed. Ma'uch v'kasus v'nasuk v'karus. Kuam b'beitzim. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. B'beitzim will begid, meaning say only if it's in the beitzim and not the gid, the member. Now kuam af b'beitzim. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says even if they're on the beitzim, they'll allow the animal to not have to be brought as a carbon. And we see from here that the beitzim are considered a mum sheva goy. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. As Rabbi Lezer and Yaakov says kuam b'gid. He says only on the gid. So his position is that the beitzim are not a mum sheba goy, and whereas Rabbi Yossi says malch v'kasos af b'beitzim nasak v'karos begid in b'beitzim. Well, he says it depends upon the type of castration to the beitzim. If it was malch v'kasos, means to say that they were crushed with a stone or they shriveled, then we're going to say that's also on the beitzim. But natok v'karos, but if they are natok, which is that they're completely severed, meaning to say their strings are cut off, then we're going to say that only applies to the bait. That also applies to the beitzim. Excuse me. That under those circumstances, that's only by the gid, but not by the beitzim. Okay, so it's a three-way machlokas. So now we go to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Behema gasa." Now we're going to talk about how we acquire the animals. What shows that you have ownership over these animals, this method of transaction. So behema gasa, a large animal like a bull or a horse, nicknames b'mesira. That's acquired where the owner of the animal gives to the purchaser the reins of the animal. That's how Rashi understands it. Moshe Mosalokech ba'afsar obasari, gives over to him the reins of the animal. That's how Rashi understands it. Or he gives him over the hair to grab a hold in the middle of the animal. But by just pulling it to you, that's not sufficient. But Vadaka, the sheep or the goats, Be'emadaka, Vadaka Bagba, the sheep or the goats, that you have to pick up. That's the position of Rebbe Meir. Whereas Rebbe Eliezer and Bechamim Omer, that's the position of Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Eliezer Chum say, Be'emadaka nicknames b'Mashiach, that the smaller animal is acquired by pulling it towards you. That you don't have to pick it up, that you have to pull it towards you. So Darish Rav Be Kim Chunya. So Rav expounded in the place called Kim Chunya. Behema Gasa nicknames b'Mashiach, even though our Mishnah says that large animal is acquired by handing over the reins, he says it's acquired by pulling it to you. So Ashkechinu Shmuel, Talmidei the Rav, and Shmuel found the students of Rav, and he said to them, "Mi Amar Rav, Behema Gasa nicknames b'Mashiach." Did Rav really say that the large animal is acquired by pulling it to you? But Va'anan b'Mesira Tanam, and our Mishnah says it's acquired by handing it over. So Gemara says the Rav Nami b'Mesira Amar, and Rav himself taught this. Gemara says Hadar Be'Me'ahi, did he really? Rav says this is between. It's a question. Did he really recant his position and say that now it's acquired only through Mashiach, through pulling it to, and not through handing it over? Gemara says, "Huda Amar Ki Aitana." Yeah, Rav, who says that the large animal is acquired through Mashiach, not Masira, he says like the following. He says like the following Tana. The Tanya, Chachamim Omer Mizu V'Zu Niknes b'Mashiach. The Chachamim are of the position that both the large animal and the small animal are acquired by pulling it to you. Rabbi Shimon Omer Zu v'zu b'hagba, that they're both acquired by lifting them up. So Maska for Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says you need to pick it up. You need to pick up the large animal to acquire it. That's what Rabbi Shimon says. Al me'ata pil Rabbi Shimon b'mei yikneh. How's Rabbi Shimon going to acquire an elephant? Do you think he's going to pick up an elephant? Abai says, okay, you can give like a handkerchief, chalipin, you give something small amount, and that's how you acquire it. Inami besochras mikomo, or else you rent out the place where the elephant is standing, and thereby you acquire the elephant. Rabbi Zera says, well, maybe arba kalim, you bring four. You bring four utensils which he owns, and then you put the elephant will put his foot into each of these buckets, so to speak, and then since you own the utensils, that's how you've acquired the elephant. Shmas Mina. So the Gemara says, well, maybe we'll learn from here a dispute which we have in Bava Basra. Can we learn from here that if the utensil is in the domain of it's utensil of the purchaser in the domain of the seller, that's an effective way of acquiring something. Where it says, no, no, what we're talking about here is it's not the domain of the seller, it's besimta. We're talking about a case, this is a corner next to the public domain, and it's not the private domain or the public domain, so that's why you're able to acquire the elephant there. It's not the seller's domain. Or alternatively, inami bechavilai zemuros, that even though we're talking about a situation where you have these bundles of like grapevines, and you put them in a pile on the ground that is 3 tfachim high, and the elephant climbs up on it. And so therefore, since the elephant is going off of the ground by 3 tfachim, he's being lifted up. And that's how he's being acquired. And so therefore, how are you acquiring the elephant? You put a little bit of grape branches on the ground, and he walks onto it. And so therefore, you're acquiring it. Even if it's in the other person's domain, it's a little bit, you're able to acquire it in this manner. So that's the explanation. But we can see from here, we can see from here a very important idea. The Gemara has this astonishing question. How can you, if you have to pick up an elephant in order to acquire, if you have to pick up an animal in order to acquire it, how are you going to pick up an elephant? The Gemara says, yeah, you can. You can pick it up a little bit. So sometimes our tasks in life are elephant size. They're giant tasks. So how do you pick it up? Put a little branches, and you start little by little to pick it up, and we can take on the largest tasks in life. To everybody, we'll stop here, and we'll daven this morning. Shkoyach.
Thank you.